Hello. Hi. I can see that people are a bit hesitant of sitting on the front row. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you what you do for a living. It's fine. My name is Tom. I work as a software consultant in Norway, where I've been for the last 3 years. And I'm 29 years old, for those of you who wondered. And the last year and a half, I have been doing stand-up comedy. No need to laugh at that. But I want to share with you today how my experience with stand-up comedy has changed the way I think as a developer and how it has changed my way of working. And I know the title makes me sound like a very good developer and a good comedian. I'm mediocre at best, at both. So why did I start doing stand-up? Well, mainly it was because my friend said I was funny. I was not. No, but it was kind of the same way as when I started studying computer engineering, because my family said I was very good with computers, whilst all I did really was to plug the router out and in again. So yeah, I went into both of these things quite blind, actually. Didn't have any knowledge or anything. But when I did stand-up the first time, reality hit hard. And because my friends had said, haha, you're so funny, then I was like, yeah, I'm funny. And I went up on stage. I had written jokes for 5 minutes, and it was 5 minutes of silence, kind of like now. Thank you. Yeah. You're a developer, so do you program in C# now? I don't program in C#. Hold with questions until the jokes are my job, not yours, okay? Thank you. No, but even with that first experience with stand-up, I did it again and again. And eventually I even took the shit show abroad, because I've now done stand-up in 4 different countries, with the 5th one on the way in a month. And you would think that when I do stand-up abroad, I would have a better English accent than I do. But no, this is what I have. And the only reason this is in English is because I'm told that my Bergen dialect is very ugly. So there you have it. So why am I telling you this in the first place? Well, because the more stand-up I did, the more I realized that there were quite a bit overlap, really, as a developer. The methodology, yes, behind writing jokes is surprisingly similar as writing code. And debugging, it's basically analyzing your stand-up set, for me, at least. And so I'm not gonna, this talk isn't just about this isn't a how to stand up. It's not. It's about telling my experience from this, and the process of getting into stand-up and learning how to write jokes, or how the fact that you write jokes is a lot like writing code, and how it is to enter a new project and stuff like that. So now you know how I got into both programming, stand-up. So I want to start about how writing jokes, it's not that different from writing code. Because every joke, it starts as an idea. Just like a function or a feature in development. And in stand-up, most comedians, they have the punchline first. That they start with the punchline and then they work from there, because that's what they want the audience to laugh at. And it's their output, because we know the reaction that we want before we actually perform it. And it's the same in programming, right? Because you don't start coding blindly. You have an end goal here. You start with that in mind. the feature that you want to build, the behavior, or whatever you want to achieve, right? And that's the output there. And then you work your way backwards to figure out the logic, the inputs, the structure you need to make it happen. I'm going to take an example from stand-up, and I had a joke about doing a medical check. The punchline that I had come up with first was that we do prostate checks by blood work now. See, you don't laugh now, because I haven't given you anything around it, because I only started with the punchline. But I knew that I wanted the reaction from the audience to come when I said that. And that's when I then had to build the setup, right? The input and the processing of it all, so that everyone would understand the punchline. Because you didn't now, so my point. And in both comedy and coding, you start with the end in mind. When you do that, it keeps everything else focused. Because you know what the success is supposed to look like, you know what goal you have in mind, and everything you do is to achieve that outcome. As a comedian, it's to get people to laugh. As a developer, it's to not crash develop or something, right? You know what your goal is. And quite often, as in programming, as in stand-up, the initial logic that you have, it doesn't necessarily produce the expected outcome, right? And now that we have the required functionality, or the feature, that we know what goal we have, we know what we're working towards. So the next step would be to define your input, right? Because you need to be very clear about what goes into this function, or this functionality, or feature. And in programming, that would be the standard parameters that you have. If you're writing a function to calculate a triangle or a rectangle, you can't just throw random shit at it. Sorry for my language. You can just throw random stuff at it. You need to be specific in what you actually desire here. And it's the same in comedy, really, because the inputs, that would be the context or the premise of the joke. I'm just going to ask, has everyone here seen stand-up before? It looked like a Hunger Games tribute from everyone. Okay. Then I know you know what the joke is, at least. But yeah, the inputs will be the context and the premise. And there you also have, like, who is the audience, what do they already know, what situation am I talking about, everything. And without the context, the punchline will crash. Just like a programming function will crash without the proper defined inputs. Because if you call a function or whatever with something that's undefined, you will not get a good result. You'll get a red squiggly line, right? And if we just think back to 2 minutes ago when I told the punchline of my prostate joke, that was the output I wanted. But for it to land, I needed to write a whole setup for it. And the input that I had there had to establish the context, everything. And the audience needed to understand what the prostate check is, or what you normally associate it with, and in what setting it would be funny that someone might have misunderstood that. And once all of these things were defined, I could structure the logic around it to guide them, the audience, to the punchline. And defining inputs, it clearly keeps it focused, right? In code, it prevents bugs. In comedy, it prevents silence. And in both, if it doesn't work, then debugging becomes much easier, because you know exactly, or you should know at least, what went in and how it should have been processed by the user. And that's when you start debugging, right? You rewrite the setup, you adjust the timing, or you change the flow, everything. And you do this until it works. So when we now come to the logic or processing thoughts of it, when you write code, you have the function body, right? All of the steps that turns the inputs into outputs, it performs something. And in comedy, it will be the setup, the tension, misdirection, whatever. It's the path that the end user or the audience, it takes from start to finish. So for the prostate joke, I'm not letting go of the prostate joke until you laugh. No, but there you have the setup, like it's quite basic. I'm not telling you the joke because you're not getting it for free. The setup will be like, someone needs to check their prostate. And there is a conditional twist in there where someone goes to the doctor expecting the fingers. And if you want like an iteration of this, then you can just escalate the absurdity in the situation. And if the logic is wrong, if the audience doesn't understand the logic, end user, whatever, it will fail. The joke will fail. Just like if you function returning the wrong value, right? If you ask for the size of a rectangle and you get Harry Potter Part 1 or something, right? Then something is wrong. And sometimes when I write jokes, it works perfectly in my head. Everyone laughs, everyone has so much fun. But when I get on stage, it crashes. It's like saying, it's the equivalent of, it works on my computer. We've all done that. And if it doesn't work, debug. Because the first version of my joke, it flopped. No one got it. Not at all. So I had to then debug it. I had to go through it. I had to check everything, and I had to change the setup, adjust the timing of everything, and then tweak the context. Because I basically had to refactor everything. Sorry. And debugging code itself can be very stressful, right? We will experience that, I hope. Okay, you're all perfect. Noted. But when you're debugging a joke in front of a live audience, that's very stressful as well. It's horrible. But at least when I do that, there's no production environment or anything that's burning because I take too long, right? And in both comedy, programming, we all know this. You require the iteration, the testing, the refinement, everything around it. And you keep tweaking everything until the output matches the expected outcome, right? So functionality, you tweak it until you get the correct number. In comedy, I would tweak everything until I get a laugh. I want to talk a bit about pattern recognition, actually. In comedy, there's something called the rule of 3. It's a classic. You just set up 2 normal things, and on the third one, you surprise the audience. It's a quick example. I love programming. I love debugging. I love crashing production. Right? You got the twist. Easy enough, right? That's normal pattern recognition. It's very predictable in its structure, but the content will not be that predictable. And that's why it works. And recognizing patterns in general, it allows you to write jokes or code faster, and you predict the reaction or the outcome of everything. And you can even reuse the material. If I find a joke structure that really works, I can reuse it for a different joke later on, because I have more than one joke, even though I only talk about the one today. But it is just as powerful in development as well. Because recognizing that a problem can be like a classic design pattern, it saves time. It prevents mistakes, and it lets you focus on the creative part of the solution. So in programming, patterns it helps you like avoid reinventing the wheel every time you do something. You have loops, you have functions, design patterns, all of this. And there are all ways to structure code efficiently, right? So let's say you work in a code base and you notice the same validation logic several places, right? Instead of, and you recognize the pattern of it. So then you can actually just refactor it and put everything into a reusable function. This is very basic, I know, but it's just to explain how pattern recognition, you do it without even thinking about it as a developer. And what I noticed is that it's the same when I did comedy. But the thing is, I didn't realize I did these things before I started doing comedy, because then I had to be much more aware of what I did in general. So I didn't notice it until then, but then I noticed how a joke structure would work, and I would reuse it. And patterns in general, it saves you time, it reduces errors, and it makes the end result stronger. Okay, no one's objecting, that's good. And then you have cross-cultural patterns. Like I said, I have performed in stand-up different countries, and some joke patterns are universal. They work everywhere. And some only work in certain cultures. For instance, I have a joke that works very well in Norwegian. It's a wordplay on tung rusmisbruker. They don't have, which directly translates to heavy drug addict. They don't have that term in Hungary, where I did the joke. And people were looking at me funny. No, but there you have an example of things that doesn't work. But it works some places. For example, the rule of 3 that I mentioned, that works everywhere. Everyone gets it. And it's the same in coding or in development, because the logic might be the same, but we all work in different languages, right? So we have different syntaxes to work with. So, but you recognize the pattern that's underlying, independent of what language you're working in, and it allows you to adapt to the code without breaking the code, right? So the pattern recognition, it teaches flexibility, because you see what's universal, what needs adjusting, and how to adapt quickly. And both in comedy and development, it's invaluable. So a big lesson from just from the pattern recognition is that recognizing the patterns is key, because it lets you write code so much faster, or jokes in my case, and you debug it faster and you adapt to new situations much quicker. Whether it's just spotting some reusable functionality or a joke structure or whatever, the brain is doing the same work, because you're seeing structure, you're predicting outcomes, you're optimizing it for success. And again, I didn't think about this until I started doing comedy, even though it's when I say it out loud, it's of course it's very basic, but you do it without thinking about it, and you should think about it, because it's a good thing. I'm gonna debugging in both. Yeah, we all know what debugging in development is, or we should, and I do the same thing when I write jokes and when they bomb. No, but in programming in general, the debugging, it is stressful, because you think you wrote the perfect piece of code, and then you get runtime errors, unexpected outputs, or just something in production or whatever crashes completely. And it's the same in comedy, except there you have a live audience. So you prepare a joke, you deliver it, and then complete silence. And the silence, oh, it hurts. It's horrible. It hurts way more than a production crash, let me tell you that. but here's the key, and here's what I learned, that failure, it's just data. In both fields, it tells you what didn't work, and it gives you a roadmap to fix it, basically. It's just about how you process the data that tells you about your failure. I'm going to tell you about my first bombing. I'm putting myself out there as a shit comedian and a shit developer. But I'm not going to talk about the first time I did stand-up, because even though it bombed, every comedian starts like that. But it was the first time I did stand-up abroad. It was in Prague, in the Czech Republic. And I had done my research beforehand. I had researched what do the Czechs like, what do they don't like, what do they respond to. And I had found out that the Czechs dislike the Slovaks, the same way we Norwegians dislike Swedes. Like, it's a funny meme, we can laugh at them and point. I was happy with that. I wrote a set on just 5 minutes, really. But and then I went up on stage and I basically just roasted the entire nation of Slovakia. Yeah, and it was dead silent. I realized quickly, of course, that this doesn't work, but I had nothing else at that point, so I just continued. And after 5 minutes of silence, I then got off stage, and the host comes up to me and he says, I think you need to leave, because we're having a concept night where we only have Slovaks in the audience. Yeah. Yeah, that wasn't fun. But one of the reasons it hurt a lot as well, because I'd done my research. I had prepared, but still, I dropped a heavy bomb. But I didn't quit. Funnily enough, weirdly enough, they invited me back the next day. But then I went through all of my jokes and just scrapped them and wrote entirely new things, because now I knew what the target audience would be. And it worked okay. I got a few chuckles instead, and that was good. But I can guarantee that most of you here has felt kind of the same way with development. Right, when you're debugging your code or whatever, because you look at the output, you trace it back to the logic or the input, and you adjust it, of course. But when you deploy it the first time, you expect it to work forever. The only difference is that nobody's laughing at your code to your face. Yet. Both comedy and coding, it requires iterations. Because you test it, you fail it, you adjust it, and you test it again, and in my case, you fail again, and then you just repeat this, right? For example, the prostate thing didn't work, changed everything. On the 6th version, then it worked. But it's the same, you have to always iterate through everything and change it to adapt. It's the same with, like, when you do programming, write a function, it crashes, you refactor, it still crashes, you refactor again, and then it works, right? Same process, same emotional roller coaster. And they both teach patience and persistence. Because the trick is to treat the failures as experiments and, as I said, data collection points, rather than just disasters. The fun part and the scary part about debugging, like in real time, is that on stage you see the audience reaction immediately. And a joke that might fail to worked yesterday, might fail today, you never know. And it's like a hotfix, basically, when you start adjusting things mid-set. And we've all done it. Not the standard part, but the hotfix part. We've all done it. And in programming, you get the test results, you get logs and everything. In comedy, you get silence or laughter. You know what the expected output is supposed to be, and you know fairly quickly if you have achieved that. Either way, you learn everything faster when you get immediate feedback. If I push a new functionality and it's not deployed until a week from now, and I get the result, this doesn't work, then I don't remember what I ate for dinner yesterday. I'm not going to remember what I did a week ago. But if it's deployed instantly, then you can see right away, it works, it doesn't work. Lessons learned from bombing. I'm not sure why I had exactly that title, but sure. I'm not hyping myself up. But it has taught me that you have to analyze the problem without ego, really. Because the error or the feedback, it isn't personal, and you have to iterate through it. Refactor the approach until it works. Embrace feedback, please. Because in comedy, it's audience reaction. In coding, it's user report, code reviews, whatever. Celebrate some small wins. Like if you get a passing test, if you get a functionality that works, celebrate it. Because God knows we have enough of the losses, so celebrate the small wins at least. And when I started to approach development the same way, with the same mindset that I use in comedy, I became a bit more resilient, creative, and more willing to experiment. This doesn't sound humble, but it's true. And debugging itself, it became less stressful because I knew that either way, like if I fail, okay, then I have more data I can work on. So both bombing and production failures, whatever logs, they're all feedback mechanisms. You learn faster, you iterate faster, and you improve faster. I want to talk a bit also about the collaboration and feedback part, because in both of the things, then you need feedback. You rarely work alone. No, I'm not going to say always, but you rarely work in a vacuum, because you're getting input from others. It's critical to improve your work. As a stand-up comedian, I rely heavily on feedback from other comedians, mentors, audience, and as a developer, I need it from in a code review, pair programming, user feedback, whatever, all I can get, really. And learning to take that feedback without ego is key. Because if there's something wrong with your code, it's not a personal criticism of you. I'm not going to say always, because there are these toxic work environments as well, but it shouldn't be. In the end, it should be about improving the outcome. All feedback should be about that. And the reason I talk about this here as well is because early on in my career as a developer, when I got criticism or feedback that was negative, I took it very personally. And you have the imposter syndrome. I think probably most of you have had. I hope that I'm not alone. No, but when I started doing comedy, then I actually learned how the feedback, it's not personal, it's to make you better. Because someone could say to me, your joke doesn't work, or the setup is too long, or my girlfriend could say, stop telling me these shit jokes, right? It's all feedback, or mostly constructive feedback. And it's hard not to take it personally at first, because criticism of any kind it's hard to swallow. But over time, I actually learned to separate myself from my stand-up jokes and me as a person, and I took that lesson into development as well. Because even when you start new projects, then there are always someone who's more experienced that will give you feedback. And it's important to not take that feedback personally and think, he thinks I suck, I should quit. Don't do that. It's constructive, it's to make you better. Should be. I'm not gonna, yeah. But yeah, it's not a reflection of you as a person, even though it can feel like that. And of course, it's not always constructive. I once got up on stage, and a girl on the front row just said, "Ew." I don't know what I could do with that feedback, to be honest, but yeah. So you can get feedback that's not constructive, but then it's important to try to eliminate that. Don't think of it. And you have the same programming as well. There you have it from the code reviewers, the QAs, or the end users. And as I said, don't take it personally. Unless it says your specific name followed by "you suck," then don't look at it, or look at it from a professional standpoint. I'm talking about this because I really, really sucked at this when I started programming. And it's only quite recently that I learned to actually take it as constructive criticism. That might be an indictment of me, or that I just got shit criticism. We don't know. Or I know, but I can't throw them under the bus. But you teach humility in both coding, comedy, whatever, because you refactor, you test again, you submit this to someone, you lay your brains out because you have spent time, you have spent energy, you have spent your mind on this, and you lay it out to someone else. And of course, it's tough when they say, "No, it doesn't work," but then reiterate again, do it better. And you have the brainstormings, right? And as a comedian, we workshop jokes together. We try different wordings, we try different setups, we give each other feedback. And in programming, right, I hope most of us have some sort of brainstorming now and then. I see one person nodding, that's good. But you should brainstorm functions, ideas, features, solutions, everything. It should, and then you will get so much better end product. And the process, it's quite similar. You toss around the ideas, you test them, you see what sticks, and you iterate through them, right? And when you do this, from my experience, it accelerates the learning process for everyone involved. And it prevents blind spots because there are always people who think of things you don't think of. And it often produces something that you couldn't have done alone. Feedback is your friend. It should say that, not key lesson, but sure. Even if it's comedy, coding, or any creative work in general, listening to the people who see this, listening to others, and iterate through the feedback, it makes your work stronger, faster, and you become more effective. And taking criticism personally, it slows you down. And do it constructively, it accelerates your growth. And I am, again, speaking from very personal experience here. Yes. I want to talk, I have some minutes left. I'm going to talk about some soft skills that both comedy and coding you need. They develop. They develop creativity, empathy, and flow. I'm sorry for my bad engelsk. Creativity in comedy, it's quite obvious. You need it to write jokes. But it's also very critical in programming, because the creativity helps you solve tricky problems, find some elegant solutions that no one has thought of, and you can design features that users love if you are creative. But if you aren't creative when you start, you will often develop this as you go along. So when I start writing a joke, I start with the problem. How do I make this everyday situation funny? Then I start experimenting with setups, word choices, and timing, everything until it works. And Because as I said earlier, the punchline is normally the first thing on the paper. And it is the same in programming, right? You start with the problem. How do I do this? How do I come from here to the expected output? How do I fix this bug? Whatever. How do I fix this? And then you start exploring the solutions, refactor it, and you iterate through it until you find the best approach. And both fields, it has trained me to think outside the box, adapt more, and innovate more in my solutions, both comedy and development. Because creativity is not just about making new stuff, it's making something that works well for everyone using it or the audience when I'm on stage. So yeah, be creative. Empathy. I think many here are confused by this. Developers are not normally viewed upon as the most emphatic people, but it's still a hidden field that you don't think about. Because we might think that empathy only entails considering others' feelings when they're sad or upset or something. But what I've learned from doing stand-up is that I need to be able to feel everything that my audience feels. And I have to anticipate reactions and adjust my deliveries to connect with them. And it is the same in programming as well. You need empathy because you need to understand your users' needs, their frustrations, their expectations. Because writing code without empathy is like, it's like me telling a joke that nobody gets. Like now. Thank you. Right, so when I performed in different countries, I needed to adjust my jokes, right? Because one punchline that worked in, for instance, Belgium, didn't work in Hungary. And then by these things, I learned to listen, observe, and adapt my approach. And the same applied for my development. If you don't understand your users, your solution will fail. Flow, this is where creativity and productivity peak. For me, as a comedian, it's when I'm on stage and the audience is engaged and I'm improvising and everything is just going seamlessly. As a developer, it's when I'm writing a function or I'm debugging a tricky problem and everything just clicks into place. I feel immersed into it and all of the progress, it just comes naturally. And both comedy and development has taught me how to find flow and stay focused and how to leverage my skills under pressure in general. I'm not saying that everyone should start doing stand-up comedy because then I would get less gigs. But creative work in general is something that would be good to explore. I have covered a lot of things today. Some key takeaways here. Start with output in mind. Know what success should look like. And then define your inputs carefully, because the context and everything matters here. Pattern recognitions, they save time and they prevent mistakes. You all do it on a regular basis. Just try to recognize when you do it. Debug, iterate, and embrace the failure as feedback. Collaborate, and I have gone through all of this. It's fine, you know. I'm just rushing a bit because I can see the time. But performing comedy in general has taught me to take risks, embrace the failures, and connect with people. Programming has taught me logic, structure, and problem solving. So it was very easy for me to go into the stand-up world. But the takeaways I had from there, very valuable in my professional life. And combining the two has made me a better developer, better communicator, and a better thinker. And if you leave this room with one thing, don't underestimate how experiences outside of work, whether it's comedy, music, or anything creative, can improve your skills as a developer. The principles are still universal. Thank you.